The house at 14 Rookhill Lane sat at the end of a quiet street, its weathered facade looming like a monument to a forgotten past. At first glance, it seemed like any other grand old home, a stately two-story with ivy crawling up its brick walls and a wide front porch adorned with a rusty iron swing. To the Anderson family, freshly relocated from the city, it was their dream home, perfect in every way. The moving van had just pulled away, leaving behind the sound of silence that filled the empty streets. The late afternoon sun bathed the house in a golden hue, casting long shadows across the neatly manicured lawn. Sarah Anderson, her husband Jack, and their two children, Maggie, a bright-eyed 8-year-old, and Charlie, a curious 12-year-old, stood at the front door, a mix of excitement and nervousness in their eyes. "Well, here we are," Jack said, giving his wife a reassuring smile. Sarah smiled, her lips tight. She could feel something about the house pulling at her, an invisible force that made her skin prickle. But she pushed the feeling aside. She had always dreamed of a house like this, a place that felt timeless, full of history. As they stepped inside, the door creaked loudly behind them, as though it hadn't been opened in years. The smell of old wood and mothballs filled the air, mingling with a strange, earthy scent that Sarah couldn't place. The foyer was grand, with a sweeping staircase that led up to a balcony overlooking the main floor. It felt colder than it should have been, as though the house had already decided it would never fully warm to their presence. The doors in the house were unusually heavy. When they opened or closed, they did so with a sharp, reverberating sound that echoed through the halls, as if the house itself was groaning with displeasure. The Andersons began to unpack, unaware of the house's secrets. There was a door at the end of the hallway that led down into the basement. It was locked, and the key was nowhere to be found. No one mentioned it during the house tour. The house had always had a basement, but it was as if it didn't want anyone to venture inside. The mirrors in the house were strangely reflective, but sometimes when Sarah looked into them, she saw strange flashes of movement, shadowy figures flickering in the background, or reflections that didn't match her exact posture. Above the children's bedrooms, there was an attic space, accessed by a wooden ladder. The door to the attic was never fully closed, and every so often it would creak open on its own, as though something or someone was waiting just behind it. There was one room upstairs, a study that had no windows. It was always dark, no matter the time of day. It was as though the light simply refused to enter. The Andersons continued to settle in, unaware of the house's true nature. At night, when the house settled into silence, there was a low, almost imperceptible sound, a faint humming like the buzzing of a broken electrical circuit. But it was never consistent. Sometimes it would come from the walls, other times from below the floorboards. Despite these oddities, the Andersons did what any family would do when moving into a new home. They unpacked, they settled in, and they began to adjust. But as the days wore on, the strange things continued to mount. It started with the attic. Maggie, always the curious one, had spent the day exploring the house while Sarah unpacked in the kitchen. By the time evening rolled around, she came down the stairs with a nervous look on her face. "Mom," Maggie whispered, her voice trembling, "there's something in the attic." Sarah furrowed her brow. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "I don't know," Maggie replied, shuffling her feet. I heard something like footsteps, but no one was up there." Sarah tried to comfort her, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. But later that night, after putting the kids to bed, she ventured upstairs to check for herself. The attic door was slightly ajar, the crack of darkness beyond it beckoning. Her heart skipped a beat as she reached for the doorknob. When she opened the door, the room was empty, save for a few old, dusty trunks. Nothing seemed amiss. Yet, the hum of the house was louder here, almost unbearable. The next day, Charlie came to her with a concerned expression. holding a drawing in his hands. It was a picture of the house, but with strange details, shadowy figures standing in the windows, their faces obscured. Beneath the picture, Charlie had written, "They never leave, they always wait." Sarah's chest tightened. "Who are they, Charlie?" "The people who used to live here," he said, his voice hollow. "They never left. They're still here." The unease grew as the days passed. Jack had noticed nothing out of the ordinary, but Sarah felt as though the house was beginning to press in on her, the air growing heavier with every passing day. One evening after dinner, the family sat together in the living room. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the shadows danced on the walls. Maggie had fallen asleep on the couch, her head resting in Sarah's lap. But the peace was shattered when they heard it, a loud bang from upstairs. Jack leapt to his feet, his face pale. What the hell was that? They all froze, listening to the thump, thump, thump of footsteps above them. "I'm going to check it out," Jack said, his voice shaky. Sarah tried to stop him, but he was already halfway up the stairs. When he reached the landing, he hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door to the study, the windowless room. Inside, there was a strange, musty smell, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. Jack's breath came out in foggy puffs as he stepped deeper into the room. That's when he saw it. The walls of the study were covered in old photographs, hundreds of them. Black and white pictures of families, children, and couples. But each one had been defaced. The eyes had been scratched out, the faces smeared with dark ink, and the words, "You will be next," were scrawled across every single one. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind slammed the door shut behind him. Jack tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. He looked around, panic rising, as the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch toward him. The hum of the house was deafening now, vibrating in his bones. And then, with a sickening lurch, the floor beneath him gave way. The house was alive. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find herself alone in the house. Maggie and Charlie were missing. Jack was gone too. The house was silent, save for the faint hum that still reverberated through the walls. Sarah ran from room to room, calling their names, but there was no answer. And then she saw it. In the center of the living room floor, a single piece of paper lay there, folded neatly. She picked it up with trembling hands and unfolded it. The words written inside were simple, but they sent a wave of ice through her body. "Welcome home." At that moment, Sarah realized with horrifying clarity that the house had never wanted a family. It wanted to execute them. It had always been part of its twisted design, a cycle that repeated itself with every new arrival. The families who moved in were merely pawns in a much darker game. And now, she too was trapped in it. She turned to face the stairway, her mind racing for an escape. But as she did, the door creaked open once more. And in the doorway stood Jack, and Maggie, and Charlie, all of them, eyes hollow, faces blank. "Welcome home, Sarah," Jack whispered, his voice not his own. "We never leave." The house had claimed them just as it had claimed the families before them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The house had her now, and it would never let her go. The cycle would continue forever.